Today's Thursday, the 18th. We are noticed from 12:10 to 1:10 p.m. And then we'll go ahead and start with introductions. So starting with Mr. Constant. Member introductions.
Christopher Constant.
Daniel Volant.
Karen Bronga.
Scott Myers.
Zach Johnson.
Meg Salatel.
Anna Brawley.
Kevin Cross.
And then also in the room, we have members of the administration, a member of, sorry, I forgot folks on the phone. So we have Mr. Rivera, are you there?
Present.
And Mr. Martinez, are you there? Maybe, he might be back on. And any other members on the phone that we missed? Okay, not hearing any. Then we also have, as I said, members of the administration. Thank you for being here. We may have Assembly Council coming back and then some folks in the audience. And so let me turn to the agenda. So we are going to move through a number of our new business items. First is an update from the Budget Advisory Commission. Do we have Mr. Clauda or another member of the commission online?
Yes, this is Nolan. I'm here, Madam Chair.
Okay, go ahead and give your report, please.
Sure. So Budget Advisory Commission, I'm glad to say we have now established a good pattern of attendance and being able to meet quorum, which had been an issue before, but we're now on a good pathway with that. I can give you a quick overview. We met in both in December and November, December and in January. I don't think I've had a chance to update the groups since our December meeting, but our December meeting we dedicated to a report by the police department. So we got really good insight from police chief about the departmental budget drivers, some of their kinds of issues, concerns about their fleet age. I think some other issues like that, some of their capital needs like evidence storage and so forth. So very good insight also about their labor rates and recruitment efforts. So very, very important stuff. We're trying to do these departmental level budget reviews. So the police department was a good one for us to sort of kick that off with. Our January meeting we dedicated to the to OMB itself, actually. So Director Lechner gave us a good overview about financial reporting at the municipality and how some of the reports that are required by Muni ordinance are maybe not always up to snuff as far as giving the most necessary information. I'm sure that Ms. Lechner has shared this information with this committee as well. She shared with us a good overview of the financial reporting for the municipality and sometimes the difficulties of obtaining a balance sheet as well as some of the more operating income statements. We've also been getting regular updates, of course, from the Anchorage School District. We are dedicating our February meeting to the ASD budget, doing more of a deep dive into that. I'm certainly personally very concerned about the state of the school district budget and whatever might happen with a base student allocation increase. But with that, I'm happy to open it up and answer any questions that the members may have.
Okay, and thank you, as always, for your service and to the other members as well. It looks like, Mr. Volant, did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I left the room and came back in, so I don't know if you already addressed this, but Nolan, is there any update on looking at the inventory tax and potentially exempting Made in Alaska products?
Through the chair, Member Voland, actually, that is something that we have not been able to revisit. We had started to go down that path in the summer when we were having issues establishing quorum. So it is something that we can put on the agenda to look at for one of our future meetings, though.
Okay, great. And if I could just follow up, I'd also be, I guess I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in potentially what it would look like to increase the exemption for the inventory tax or do away with it altogether. So would love the commission's advice on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll note to members, I am attempting to look at my cell phone, so if you're on the phone, please text me, and otherwise just raise your hand. Any other questions for Nolan? Okay, not seeing any, so thank you for being here, and sounds like a lot of interesting policy topics to talk about.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next we will move to one of several items for our CFO, Mr. Thurn. First, we have the MOA Trust Fund Board, if you can give an update.
So the trust fund board was established back in middle of October. They have met, I'm a member of it, 4 or 5 times since then. We're looking to meet again here in the next week. We have a meeting in March. They have been meeting solid, all 100% participation at every meeting. So been doing a lot of work on basically creating the trust. This is a lot of work on investment policy statements, looking at our different vendors. They're getting ready to look at a 2024 budget and start preparing that. We're looking at the staffing capabilities of the municipality along with what their potential needs might be and different investment type things. We've had a lot of discussions. If you remember in code, there was a trust manager that was the deputy treasurer position, and we have had excessive conversations about what their expectations are, what their needs are for that type of position, whether that person who we do not currently have anybody in that position, we have an acting. If we were to fill it, what kind of qualifications would they have? How hard would it be to fill? What else would they be doing besides that job? Is it the right department? Do we even have the capabilities in the city to be able to do it? Do they need to contract that type of service? So lots and lots of meetings. The CFO is the responsible party for them to come to, even though I'm on the board for all of these concerns. So we met 2 hours yesterday. A lot of activity going on with this particular board, looking at their responsibilities, and a lot of real interest in setting this board up for long-term success, similar to the permanent fund. And they've jumped right in, and we've spread our fiduciary responsibility out across a broader thing. So that's kind of the update. But we're meeting quite often on topics and moving those things forward.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from members?
All right.
Okay.
Seeing none, I'll move on to FEMA, my lovely FEMA. It's actually been since September since I've actually given an update. So we're talking FEMA COVID. And all of these things, these changes here that are listed, those have actually happened since then. So why it says prior month changes, since this is really since the last time we did this. But I'm not going to really focus on that. I'm going to really basically tell you every project at FEMA has been obligated for COVID, and all projects but 4 have been paid for by the state. So we have basically the difference between 123.7 and the 125.4 that we're waiting. I'm expecting 3 of those payments to roll in any day. And the 4th one, I had to wait till the 4th quarter or till December 31st because I'm doing the management expenditures for 2023. So I had to wait till we got through the entire year. So I'm real close to finishing that up, and I'll submit that to them. But all projects are obligated. Almost all projects are paid. I'm expecting by the end of February to basically say, I'm done. As far as the state and FEMA, we would then have to do a disaster closeout. I've never gone through that because we've never closed it. The earthquake's never going to be closed out, so we've never done that one. But that's another stage that we have to work through there. I think you are aware we do have a slight lawsuit issue that might be impacting one of those things, and we'll see how that all pans out and what I can do. And then the other aspect of this, as we've discussed, there is a piece that's broken out in those 4 items on the bottom there, which are the non-FEMA reimbursable things. And at some point here, and we've talked about different timings, we will have to decide how you decide to seek reimbursement from that. I believe for the majority of that money, it stated that the taxpayers would end up reimbursing that. So I want to get through the entire project, know exactly what that delta is. I think if you're looking right now, it's about $1,250,000, somewhere in that ballpark. Is not going to be coming from FEMA, and we do need to replace the fund balance. The big question is going to be timing. Do we try to rush to get it in the mill rate for this year, or do we wait and have it affect the following year? But I need to finish first before those conversations happening. But this is just kind of a what's on the horizon kind of a thing. But the good news is out of 126.8 million, we're going to get 125.5 for sure. So I don't know what that percentage is I think, remember, you like to calculate percentages, but it's a pretty high percentage of reimbursement. And that's kind of where where COVID is. So we're very close to wrapping it up. I'll stop there for questions.
Okay, thank you. Just really briefly, and then I'll turn to members. I'll so yeah, it sounds like about 99% if I did the math right, if we're talking 1.25 million. So that seems like a really good deal for an unprecedented global emergency that we were able to get most of it paid by the Fed. So thank you so much to you and your team for that work. Just can you characterize in a little more detail what was non-reimbursable, or I'll try to, and then maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I'd be more than happy.
Okay,
to.
go ahead.
The vast majority of this, and we've talked about this before, was municipal labor that was charged to COVID that was ultimately not eligible in the first place. And basically, we told people to begin with, count your time by charging there. Whether it was eligible for reimbursement or not was kind of determined after the fact. And because we were focused on the non-labor items, I took $6.5 million out in 2020, but then I did not revisit looking at labor again until last year. And by then, 2020 had closed, 21 had closed, and we were not able to go back in some of those years since the financials were closed and put back into people's budgets time that should have been in their budgets and instead were charged to COVID. So now we're in the situation where that time, which was not eligible, I can't put it anywhere, and thus it's there. Very little, actually, 190,000 out of our entire 126.8 million was FEMA determined to be ineligible. And I can tell you the vast majority of that was all of our efforts to have people work from home during COVID. When that decision came out and we gave them printers and copiers and toner cartridges and all that kind of stuff, that was never an eligible FEMA reimbursable thing. But large number of transactions, but a very small total dollar amount. But that first item there, that 189,245 is the amount that FEMA formally said was not eligible. The other part, we would have never, if we would have been more timely in looking at these things, we would have moved that money back to the general fund budgets before the year closed, and we wouldn't have had that issue. But because of timing, now we're at that particular state.
Thanks. So just to restate, the things that aren't being reimbursed are essentially our employees' time that we would have paid anyway. I'll move to Member Zalatel and then Member Constant.
Thanks. This is just a request, is that the administration can bring forward what it wants to do with the unreimbursed FEMA by the March Budget Finance Committee. Do you want to take it up at this tax conversation in April, or do you want to kick the can down the road until the following year? So that's the request, so that we can know what's coming and we can figure out how that fits in the overall picture. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll echo that request. Member Constant.
Right, and that's a binary this year, next year, but also does it have to be done all at once? Could we do it in a couple of years to limit the burden? I don't know what the answer to that is, but so just to put a real number on it, the total sum of what we have asked for was $126,817,556.90. We have been obligated $125,438,071, which leaves $1,248,722.74, which by my read is less than 1% of the total. It's actually somewhere around 0.9%. And so it's extraordinary, Alden. And it's worth saying again that when we were in the middle of this process, politics being what they are, we were lectured, we were shouted at, we were hammered that we are putting the taxpayer at risk. You're making a mistake. You're spending money we don't have, all of these things. And for the purposes of our municipal fiscal security over time, we have our funds that are set up, our savings accounts for nightmares just like this. And Mr. Thurn, you've proven that we can weather a pretty heavy storm. Thank you.
And it'll actually get slightly better than that, because there's that last 250,000 for 23 is in our cost number, but I haven't had the ability to put it in my obligated number. So it's actually, we'll get close. That number will shrink some as well. So the percentage will actually get slightly better.
Thank you. Yeah, just to
credit to the work of that team and the fiscal liquidity of the municipality.
Yeah, great success story. Can I ask also, those on the phone, if you could mute, we hear a little bit of background noise. Thank you. Any other questions from members?
And if we're going into D, I'll just make one quick comment, then I'll hand it over to Mr. Byrd. Just an update on the quarterly ARPA reporting. Because that's another one of my duties. I'm working with our consultant. We're making very good progress, and I do anticipate we will meet the fourth quarter reporting deadline, which is the end of the month for this month. So we're doing very well on our reporting for that. So then I'll hand it over to Mr. Byrd. Any
Yeah.
more comments
thank
with
you.
regards to update on ARPA?
And also
Or
invite
Trista.
Trista SB up as well. Thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Burton and Ms. SB.
Through the chair, all I was going to do is hand it to Ms. Espy, so if I may.
Hello, so I'm here to provide an ARPA update. So first and foremost, all ARPA funding has been dispersed externally to all subrecipients. To echo what Alden was saying, for treasury reporting for ARPA, there's 4 quarterly expenditure reports. Yesterday, I sent over to the co-chairs and through Claire the quarter 3 report. It is 200 plus pages, so it is just in the PDF format. And then there's also 1 yearly performance report. Every year, this is uploaded onto the Municipality of Anchorage website. So that is also quite a long report, and it was the link was sent to the co-chairs. As far as grant compliance and monitoring, last year after reviewing audits and how the Municipality of Anchorage was overseeing the ARPA grants, we made the decision to further gather grant compliance and monitoring information from ARPA 1 and ARPA 2 subrecipients per the reporting requirements in their grant agreements. Our contractor, Ken Miller with Denali FSP, conducted a training for all ARPA subrecipients to detail further information needed from these subrecipients to ensure the Municipality of Anchorage was gathering important and critical factual data to support the spending of ARPA funding. And this project is still a work in progress. And with that, I'll take questions if you have any.
Yeah, thank you. To start out, I wonder, we had submitted some questions and I'm emailing them to staff to get them distributed. I wonder if you could maybe run through those, because I think those were some of the questions we wanted answered, and then we can see if members have other questions.
Sure, so I can run through those. So the first question that they sent over was, ARPA funds can be spent by an organization up to 12/23 of 2026, but must be allocated by the Assembly by 12/31/2024. And they were asking if that information is correct. So to clarify, all ARPA funds have been appropriated by the Assembly. All ARPA funds must be obligated, also known as the Municipality of Anchorage verbiage, encumbered by 12/31/2024. All subrecipients' funding has been appropriated and obligated and dispersed externally. All Municipality of Anchorage funds have been appropriated but not yet encumbered internally. The next question was, what are the end dates set forth in the grant agreements? So there were a few ARPA 1 grant agreements that ended earlier than 2026. All these grant agreements have been spent in full and are now complete. All remaining ARPA grant agreements have an end date of 12/31/2026, which was the final date for all ARPA recipients to spend their funding. The next question was, did I anticipate that there would be leftover funding that we would need to reallocate before the 12/31/2024 deadline? So currently the only funding that could be reappropriated is funding appropriated to internal Municipality of Anchorage departments that is not yet spent. The next question was, do we have a mechanism to determine if groups will be able to spend their funds on time? And if they can't, do we have a way of getting these funds back by the 2026 deadline? So federal ARPA guidelines allow for groups to spend ARPA funds again until December 31st, 2026. Through quarterly expenditure reports, our office tracks spending for all subrecipients. If groups do not spend their funding per their grant agreements, then of course the Municipality of Anchorage could then ask for that funding to be returned. And then the final question was, can you provide monthly reports at this meeting on anticipated leftover funds so that the Assembly can reappropriate as needed? So currently I can't provide monthly reports, but I can provide quarterly reports on funding spent per the federal ARPA guidelines. We require 4 quarterly expenditure reports from all subrecipients. This is when subrecipients provide the information to the municipality on their spending that quarter. This information is then utilized to submit the quarterly reports due to the Treasury. So at this time, ARPA funds are not monitored monthly as we adhere to the federal guidelines set forth in the SLURF guidelines.
Okay, thank you. Go to Member Constant.
So you referenced a 200-page report. Has that been sent to us? Is it online?
That was an attachment in the email, so I just forwarded it, so we'll get it
Okay,
out
so we
there.
haven't seen that. Because you just gave a great report, but I would like to have that report in writing. It's pretty hard to track. And so that was my first question. And then, so we had just had a brief discussion about expenditures that were approved and the possibility of, the unlikely possibility of some of those being needed to be reappropriated by the end of the year. But we have over 8 months ago, I think it was in June or July, there was some major reporting on one of our grantees who received a substantial amount of money and made some purchases that looked like they were clearly outside of bounds. And then, of course, they sold that building, a fire caught. And I have asked the municipal attorney's office, what are we doing about reclaiming those funds, doing an audit, figuring out if the funds were spent properly? And so do you have an update on the status of the reclaiming of those funds, or at least us ensuring that the right thing is being done on that grant?
So you are correct. The legal department is currently working on that. Do they give an update? We have one of our attorneys here that's currently working on that project. If you have questions for legal, I don't want to speak on their behalf.
Probably the answer is we need to be briefed in an executive session, but I think that the reality is there are ongoing public concerns about that one grantee, and who knows what they've done with the money or where it's going. And so we certainly haven't heard that any claims have been made or a request for an audit. But if the assembly needs to file some form of paperwork to establish that an audit should be done, a reclamation of those funds should be attempted, we need to know, because time is passing, and every day that we aren't getting in front of this is a day that the individual, the organization may be getting away with theft.
Yeah, I see Attorney Robert Owens coming up to give an update if whatever's possible to share in this meeting.
I have gathered all the available records in our system. I've got a request for a conversation with the municipal auditor to discuss an audit of their books and the like. I also just spoke with Trista about what BDO did, and I'm going to be digging into that as well. I am also searching for all of the records relating to whatever transactions, land acquisitions and sales and the like, but I don't have that information yet. So I'm still in the process of gathering information, but it is active and ongoing.
This is your project?
Yes.
Okay, that is all I needed to hear.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate, this is certainly of public concern, and it seems to be the hopefully the only one that we had that situation. So please keep us apprised and make this a priority.
Actually, I think there's
one
another
other.
one.
Yeah, I think there was one other, but that's under its own process and less concerning.
Okay, other questions from members? Okay, I do actually have one question, and this would be more of a follow-up. I know that there is some internal ARPA money that you mentioned, and it looks like that's the one, if we have to have it encumbered by the end of this year, that's the one that's at risk in terms of, making sure we're meeting our deadline. So could you maybe characterize what that internal funding is and then follow up with more detail, including amounts? Thanks.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So I've worked with OMB to figure out the numbers of which departments were appropriated specific funding. Some of them were not aware of how much money they were appropriated. And so I'm working through that list with them to figure out if they do have a plan to utilize these funds by 2026, or if they are able to be reappropriated. So I can follow up with you on that.
Yeah, thank you. And I would also ask that, because I know it's a process, so I don't want to get in a situation where it's November and then we're trying to figure out if they're used or not. But I also want to give those departments an opportunity to use their funds. And so perhaps also by the March meeting, we could get an update on where those are at. And then I would also ask that the departments and administration look at encumbering those maybe by June 30th or some earlier deadline, so that if there is an opportunity to reappropriate or there's a reason why they wouldn't use those funds, that we have time to contemplate what they could be used for. Thanks. Any other questions?
Let me speak a little bit about
Yep.
this. Mr.
Yeah,
Mayor.
go ahead.
So, currently we were budgeted about a little over 103 million total. As of 12/31, we're above 95 million that's either been shipped out to subrecipients or spent internally. We have it at, at 12/31, there's a report, because that's what I'm reporting to the Treasury. We know, that delta is still available, but we know internally on the spreadsheet which appropriations those things were for and which ones are left. If you remember, you already reappropriated 2.25 million last September for homeless activities, of which by the end of December, 600,000 of that had been spent. So I expect that to be done. The key here is that the government is requiring that by the end of 24, we have to have it obligated. So I personally not obligated all of the money internally because I don't know what other movements might happen. But by the end of the year, should I still be here to do the fourth quarter reporting, we'll move what's balanced for budget for the municipal staffs into an obligated status to meet the deadline. But I've left that right now. The municipal part that's obligated is only the amount that's been spent, even though the budget is that difference. So I just been kind of playing it because I anticipate you guys like to move stuff around on a daily basis. So I didn't want to have to redo my reports and all those kind of things. And going back to regards to Mr. Constant's comment, every quarter the report is there. So if going forward you'd like to see every quarter, we can produce the PDF that you're getting for the third quarter. When the fourth quarter is done, we can produce the fourth quarter and send that around as well. The annual report, which Trista was referring to, which is prepared for by our consultant that is done in July, is on the municipal website. It's a one-time-a-year thing. It will happen again this coming one, but there's already access to that. But I understand that I'm the one who has access to quarterly, and if you'd like them, we'll just make it a plan to send every quarterly one going forwards PDF so you can see how that money has been spent and how it's been put into the Treasury portal on a prospective basis going forward.
If I might.
And Mr.
Thank
Constant.
you, Madam Chair. For my part, that's fine, great information, but what's more valuable is the summary that was written in red that framed it all for us. I want to make sure we get that information, some summary. The report's great, but sorting through 200 pages of spreadsheets is not my favorite thing to do. So some form of communication in the language I speak.
Well, since I did it, I was hoping you'd actually read it.
I haven't received it yet, but I will read it. But again, I need a way to understand how to access it, right? Just a summary that's the valuable piece. How do I understand this 200-page document?
Yeah, thank you. And just to clarify, I was remiss in forwarding this so that it was ready before this meeting, but you'll get the written version of the answers that Trista provided and the full report, and it'll be posted on the committee website as well. And just to be clear, it's not that we like to move money around for the sake of it. It is really, we want to make sure we're making the best use of those funds. And so what I wouldn't want to happen is that there's a leftover money that ends up maybe getting obligated, but doesn't. It's a missed opportunity that it could have been used somewhere else, and that's a policy choice. So I think that's what we're looking toward, to make sure that we're maximizing those funds. Any other questions from members? Okay, then why don't we move on? Thank you for being here, and we will take a look at those reports. So now we're moving on to the budget. So I will turn to our acting OMB director, Sharon Lechner.
Thank you. And speaking of being remiss for not distributing reports before the meeting, I'm similarly remiss for not distributing these reports before today. And the reason why is because they were mostly finished late last night, and then the alcohol tax report was finished about 15 minutes ago. But we really wanted to get this December report to you rather than distributing the November report, because the quarterly reports include the utility and enterprise funds. And so they're much more of a complete set of reports rather than the November reports, which only report general government. And additionally, you're looking at 12 months of activity rather than just 11. So they're much more easy to understand. On page 1, this is the top of the pyramid. It's the summary of the general government activity for the year. And it shows when you first glance at it that we're very much underspent. But I would exercise caution in interpreting this report because it pulls from our SAP system, and anything that's not yet entered into the system will be missing from the report. And most importantly, TAN's expense is not yet reported in the system, and we happen to know that TAN's expense this year is going to exceed our budget by a considerable amount. And additionally, IGCs have been posted only through the month of March of 2023. So we will have more expenditures trickling in. What OMB does with the December report is we'll continue to issue this one a few times as more expenditures trickle in. If we move to page 2, this report takes the total, but it splits it out between labor and non-labor. So if you look at the left half of the report, it gives the impression that labor will be 10 million underspent for 2023. But I would exercise caution in over relying on that 10 million underspend for 2 reasons. Number one, 2023 is missing the journal entry at the end of the year for what we call IBNR, or incurred but not reported. And typically that journal entry runs between about $1 or $2 million per year. And additionally, more importantly, we have been undercharging workers' comp and general liability premiums. And we intend to go back and try to determine what departments need to be charged a retroactive premium for 2023. And that could be to the tune of $4 to $5 million. And it will take us some time to determine what departments need the premium, but we have a pretty good guess of what departments those will be. So that $10 million might whittle down to about $4 million with those extra charges. And over to the right, it appears that the non-labor is about $26 million underspent. But again, we're missing IGCs and potentially other charges for the months of April through December, as well as potentially year-end journal entries. If we move to the next sheet, this is overtime. And if you go down to the bottom right hand of the report, you can see that overtime is overspent for the year by about $6 million. And the overspenders are fire, M&O, PM&E, and public transportation. And if you add up those overspenders, you get to about $5.4 million. And the other departments make up the rest as a whole. If we go to the next report, we're looking at the travel report. And as a whole, the departments are $82,000 overspent for travel. And police was the department that overspent by $150,000. All of the other departments as a whole underspent. If we go to the next report, this is the alcoholic beverages report. And when the final report comes to the assembly, it will look a little bit cleaner. But we were in a rush to get this to you. And so that's why it looks a little bit heavier than the other reports. This report indicates that for 2023, we are 85% spent for the year ending 2023 for information pulled as of January 18th, 2024. And you can see that this report is different than the others because it's a function cost report. So it shows you how the spending is by the actual function used. But we wanted to get this to you today. This one may end up getting a little bit closer to being fully spent, but this is probably a more complete report than the other reports. If we turn to the next report, we're now moving on to the enterprise funds and the utilities. The last time you saw these reports was as of the quarter end September 2023. And we learned that the September reports were missing an important row. And the report that was missing was depreciation. And so what that means is that when you saw the budget numbers at the total of the report, the budget numbers were greatly understated. So for a utility like water or wastewater, they could have understated the budget by $10 million or more. So we have scrubbed the reports, and now the expenses agree to the budgets that have been appropriated by the Assembly. Additionally, there have been a lot of other changes made. The changes include for water and wastewater that some of the investment activity was misstated as amortization of debt discount, but it was accretion of a debt premium. But more importantly, MUSA and MISA was recorded as an expense, but it's actually a transfer, sort of like a transfer of equity. And similarly, dividends to the owner, of course, the municipality of Anchorage, were recorded as an expense, but again, they're a transfer. So everything's been sliced and diced to more properly reflect government accounting standards, and also so that these reports now look more like what you see when you open up your detailed schedules at the end of the year. But when you look at these reports, they generally show that the utilities are doing great relative to budget. But we've added some footnotes so that folks don't over-rely on that, because since we've only recorded certain things through March, many expenditures are understated, and they generally fall in a couple of categories. Number one, depreciation and amortization is missing the months of April through December, so don't rely on that. Charges by or to other departments, which I would call IGCs, are very much under-recorded in the actuals column, and those are the footnotes called A. And then the footnote called B is anything that we've resorted. And then down at the bottom is where we reconcile total expenses to the total appropriation, because we're required to do that for you by code. So hydropower appears to be close to budget. When we record the rest of depreciation and amortization and IGCs, it'll probably be pretty close. If we go next to water utility looks very much under budget, but we're missing so many months of depreciation and amortization and IGCs that the expenditures will grow quite a bit before we see the final report. Similarly, with wastewater utility is missing 3/4 of a year of depreciation and amortization and IGCs. So the expenses could be as high as over $51 million, give or take, before we catch up on our journal entries. Merrill Field is one utility that right now, if you look at the actuals, appears to be showing net operating income. But I anticipate that by the time we catch up on depreciation and amortization and add some more IGCs, it will push it into a loss category. The Port of Alaska similarly looks like it's doing fantastic compared to budget, but that's primarily because we're missing many months of depreciation and amortization and IGCs. I anticipate that total expenses, once we add those things, will be about $26 million, give or take. And it's going to take their net operating income into net operating loss category. And then solid waste services, we have 3 pages for solid waste services. The first one is administration. And that sheet looks very funky and it shows a loss. But the reason why is because those costs haven't yet been pushed down to the subsidiaries through the IGC process. So once the controller division catches up with their monthly IGC process, I believe that what we'll see is a 0 for the calendar year 2023. So then let's go to disposal. Disposal, similarly, just like the others, it needs to catch up on depreciation and amortization and IGCs. But it and refuse have one funky thing that you will see the next time we meet at our regularly scheduled assembly meeting, and that is that we budgeted for debt repayments only in the disposal utility, but upon further reflection, should have budgeted for repayment of the debt between disposal and refuse. So if we turn to refuse, you'll see a footnote that is specific just to the refuse utility, and that is footnote C. And what footnote C says if we look down on the reconciliation at the bottom of the sheet, you'll see that there's a supplemental appropriation, which, if it had been approved by the Assembly already, would be for $1.3 million. And that is, if the Assembly approves the resolution, would shift the responsibility for repayment of the debt. Right now, the burden is just on one utility, but it would shift the responsibility so that it would be shared between the two utilities. And so if the Assembly approves the supplemental appropriation, then the next time that this report is issued, we'll have a supplemental appropriation shown here. And then Solid Waste Services will be able to share the burden of its debt. And we will need to similarly come back for fiscal year 2024, because unfortunately the initial budget had similarly only budgeted for the debt repayment for one of the two utilities. So it's going to be a repeat this year if the Assembly approves the split of the responsibility between the two utilities.
Yeah, thank you. I had Member Constant in the queue and then Member Zalatel.
So I have a few questions around a number of things. Welcome, Ms. Lechner. I'll just, before we dive in, say that for the purposes of scheduling and planning, we've made the determination we will take up the question of confirmation at the meeting of February 27th. And I know that's a long time out,
Okay.
but Ms. Zalatel and I are both gone for the meeting of the 13th. And so it's just not practical to have it before then,
Okay.
which would mean we would try to schedule the hearing for half an hour on February 23rd.
Okay.
So
I didn't bring my calendar with me, but
those are general meeting dates
Okay.
for us. So
Okay.
one is a
Okay.
regular Assembly meeting and one
Okay.
is the Friday before, which
Okay.
tends to be times when we can have work sessions. So we don't have the half an hour set yet, but that's the date and
Okay.
time. So for planning purposes, or put it out on the horizon a bit. If there's some question about needing a resolution to extend,
okay.
we probably don't need that for practical purposes. That's first. So
Okay.
second, when we look at solid waste, I want to make sure I
Yeah.
have the language right. Solid waste refuse collection is the trucks that are driving, and disposal is the landfill. Is that correct?
Well, refuse is trash. Yeah, and disposal is correct.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the landfill is disposal and collection is the trucks out there driving.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I am sorry, I must have been distracted. I see a substantial number variance here on the budgeted versus actuals for the disposal utility. Can you one more time just help me understand how we're only what appears to be half spent, roughly a little bit over half spent on their budget for the disposal, the landfill?
So what I did off to the side for all of the utilities was I did an estimate, a super rough estimate for what depreciation and amortization could be if we had 12 months booked. It may end up being slightly different because if the utilities end up buying more assets during the year or retiring assets, the number will be different. But pretending we had an exactly flat set of assets, depreciation for disposal could be $4.34 million at the end of the year, which would still be less than budget. And charges by or to other departments, if they were exactly flat for the year, could be about $4.15 million through the end of the year, which would still be under budget. I suspect that if the Assembly does pass the resolution that is in front of them, interest on bonded debt should be lower than budgeted. Because remember that this budget assumes that all of the debt will be in this one utility, which is not really, in retrospect, appropriate. That was a mistake by OMB. But it's up to the Assembly whether or not it wants disposal to have to take the entire hit or not. If the Assembly passes the resolution, then the impact will be that disposal will have a positive budget variance on interest on bonded debt at the end of the year, which theoretically it should, because disposal should not be punished and have to bear the entire burden of all of the debt, and then and its sister utility gets a free ride.
Okay, so all that's great. Still, I don't know that I am grasping. So if I'm looking at the total expenses or the amount appropriated by the assembly lines towards the bottom, there's a substantial difference. We're talking $10 million almost. If you get to the bottom line with all of the numbers added in, or at the top of that section, total expense, 33 million versus 18 million. How are we so off? And I know you're new here, so I'm not coming at you. I'm just asking, how are we so off in our projection to what we actually spent? And yet we still managed to operate a landfill.
I think that I am not knowledgeable enough
Yeah.
about this utility to answer that
I
question.
really appreciate that
Yeah.
answer. And because it's way better than saying what you don't know. But
Yeah.
I think we have to figure out what's such a difference there if this is our anticipated closure, because it's either something is missing or they're just become so efficient that they're delivering services at 50% the staffing, or
So I would recommend two things. Number one, I would recommend that someone from solid waste come in and answer the question. And number two, I would recommend that we allow more of the 2023 expenditures to fall into the income statement before we draw a conclusion
fair.
about whether or not they're $10 million under budget, because they're going to be a lot less than $10
TBD.
million under budget.
TBD is the answer. Okay, a couple more quick things. I promise they won't be so long.
Actually, Mr. Constant, are they on different topics?
Yeah, they are.
Okay,
So I can
so I
come
wonder
back
if
around.
members Zalato, you had a question on this topic.
Yeah, really quickly, the AR you're going to put before us for the $1.3 million. Can you really make sure it's clear, like super clear, because this is complicated?
So it would-
And I think that's just my request, or if the memorandum attached to it can be really clear, I think that will be helpful.
So the AR is already in front of you. It was introduced at the last regularly scheduled meeting. I didn't write it. I would have written it quite differently. It is AR 2024-15. It is quite short.
So I guess my request is, if you would have written it differently, could you prepare an S and send it to me? To me
Okay.
personally, and then I
Sure.
will, I'll contemplate it, because
Okay.
if it's quite short, I don't feel comfortable with that. Your explanation wasn't quite short, and I really want to make sure it's a complete record. Thank
Okay,
you.
absolutely.
Thanks. And then back to Mr. Constant.
All right, thanks. So over to the hydropower utility that's in the middle of the packet. So we list there under the revised budget, there's 181,000. I guess it answers itself. We just didn't fill that position, did we? You know, Alden? Sure.
I know the answer to that. We have not filled the position. My understanding is that a candidate was identified, offered a position, but the candidate had accepted a position on the East Coast.
So it's amazing that we can generate $3.3 million of revenue without anyone leading. It's a little terrifying, actually. AI has taken over. And then on the fire page, I want to note just, or actually it's on your budget actuals.
Which page?
Overtime.
Overtime, okay.
And again, this is no strike to OMB staff, but the fire department is not running hot on overtime. We made a policy decision through the administration that we would not fully staff the fire department. And so overtime is actually how we budget for actual delivery of the fire department services. And so it's just, I'm going to say it every year until we figure out how to budget properly for it, that's not an unanticipated expense. We absolutely anticipate, because we don't hire, and there's always the slider between hire enough people, you might have excess staff, versus pay overtime to deliver the mission. And so I understand that this is a good snapshot, but I always want to speak to the fact that we actually, by policy and intent, for lack of better decision-making, in my opinion, choose to budget overtime as an actual expense and not, it's not overtime, it's actual labor cost. So I just want to say that for folks.
Do you have other questions, Mr.
I
Constant?
think that's it.
Okay. I have, well, two items. One, just in general, I appreciate the detail, and I know it can be hard, especially like, as you said, you were preparing these for this meeting and it was a rush. And this information is still growing. It is also helpful to have some kind of summary in mind. So I'm not asking for a separate document necessarily, but I think it is, I'm hearing a lot of paper shuffling and I think folks are having trouble kind of tracking with so much detail.
So I think the committee can disregard these reports because these reports will come to the entire assembly and they will be accompanied by a written AIM. So you can toss these because they're coming back to you, to every member of this committee. And the only change will be that the alcohol tax report will be just a little cleaner looking.
Thank you. And on that point, I think I have some follow-up questions, but I'll save those for offline. But one I do want to ask is I'm looking at the alcohol tax report and I saw something that I think I haven't seen before in these, and I've looked at them since this started in 2021. I'm seeing under first responders, there's 2 police lines and they're actually showing over budget. And so I wondered, because I know, again, to the point of, sometimes departments do go over budget. I don't think I've ever seen that in the alcohol tax report. So I just wondered, was that a policy choice? Because basically what they're doing is using more budget than what was budgeted for that purpose. And then I know we've had the issue of underspending. So it's not that we don't have the money in the fund, but I just want to flag that because I think that's different than previous years. And again, because the alcohol tax money, it is dedicated. So it's not that it's being used for a different purpose, but we have these limits in here. And so, if this was fully spent, this would be taking essentially almost $200,000 from something else, right? So I just wanted, if you could comment on that.
Well, I can't, but what I will do is I will look into this, and when the written report is prepared, I will address it in the written report.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, because again, I just want to flag that it's not that it's not being used for the correct purpose, but it is being used what looks like general government overtime or overspending, and so I'm concerned about that. Okay. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I missed it in Alvin's report. I don't know who could answer this, but did anyone raise the question of the closing of the books of 2022? Did I miss your report on that?
That one. So let me just first say, we did close April last night. Sharon's been this information here is based on March. So we are trying to get 23 closed. So we're working on May right now. I just wanted to give an update on where we are on 23. On 22, we're hoping to have AWU sent out. I'm hoping sometime next week. We're very close to getting Civic done very soon. Shortly after that will probably be the port and solid waste. And because they remember all of these roll up into the ACFR. And then I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks, we will get the numerical and the note parts of ACFR done. It then requires approximately a 4-week multi-review period for BDO to go through their things. So at this particular point, I think we're looking at end of February, first part of March for the ACFR to be finalized. It absolutely has to be done before March 31st because that's significantly impacting our $20 million on the SEMT money. So one way or the other, it's got to be out before then. But that's kind of the audits that are still there for 22 and where we are in that process.
Okay. And then bond rating process. When is this cycle beginning again? Now that we've paid back $125 million into
Well, the bond rating agencies contact me monthly wanting to know what's going on with the 2022 thing, and I have to keep writing a interesting paragraph on why we're not done and so forth. We did get, I forget which one it was, but the bond rating agencies, while they are concerned about our financials not being done, they're more interested in how our fund balance has happened. So we've been able to pretty much show them that because we have that revenue for COVID that's come back, that we are hoping that it will end at end of 23 at our 10 and 2. And the one agency, like I said, I'm sorry, I forget which one it was, but it was in late November. They basically said, great, thanks for the information. They asked for it and they're saying that we kept our rating and they kept us as a stable outlook. Once we once we get our financials done and we can prove to them that we're on that positive state, it'll still take probably a couple of years of continuing meeting our thresholds before we try to claw back those 2 downgrades we got when we went into the negative because of
And
COVID.
when do we expect the annual publication of those ratings?
Normally they come out when we sell bonds. That's when the rating gets attached to that particular thing. I can tell you, we do have the rate. I can get you the rating for the agency that we had to do back in late November, December. Like I said, they kept the same rating and it has an outlook on it. But that one's been,
Okay, so
and that's normally good for another year.
it's not an annual cycle. It's when they go to.
Normally, when we need to sell is when they'll do it. However, they check up with us on an annual basis, and then to make sure that their outlook is they're comfortable.
We're not anticipating some statement in the next 4 months broadly about our credit rating.
Not from a negative standpoint. From what I've been hearing and what Ross has been talking to them, they're not happy that it's taken us so long to get our financials done, but they are very happy with the fact that we've been able to claw back $127 million of money that a couple of years ago we did not have in our checking and our savings accounts. And as such, if we've been able to prove to them that money is back and we're on our way to that 10-2 threshold, that's really more important to them. I'm not saying getting the they're not going to go and give us a better rating if we can't get our financials done on time, but the getting the money back is certainly a bigger impact on the actual rating itself.
Okay, so it probably would be good at some point to, separate from the ongoing business of the committee, to prepare a briefing and training for new members on how all this works, right? As a kind of a separate conversation. Then we need to tell you what's on the spreadsheet. Let's have a conversation briefing the new members on how all of this works, the cycles, the flow, what they look at, how the financial health of the municipality is measured from an external perspective.
And it would be great if we could do it on here's what we'd like to do on a normal basis rather than saying we're a year and a half behind in a variety of things.
Yeah.
Sharon has done an unbelievable job since she's been here on these things. And I hope you see that from the across the thing about how the reports there, some of these things that she's bringing up about things that she's caught and we're trying to fix. So we're spending a lot of hours to try to get caught back up, do a good job, be very thorough. I completely understand. We've been talking about this for years. It's hard for you to make decisions when I say to you, I don't have any numbers. So I understand it, and the staffs are working to their best to try to get caught up, but we were so far behind. That's why I mentioned we did close April. So why she just produced that, which was March, we have another month that's already been added. So that's even greater. And we're going to try to crank May out. And we've got a lot of people really working hard to try to get this caught up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Thorne. So just a time check. I would ask the members if we could extend just by 10 minutes and finish at 1:20, because we do have one more item. And then I'll note, I agree with Mr. Constant. I do believe that we should do that. We should do it outside of the purview of this monthly meeting. We should try to do it in March so that members feel like they're ready to go into first quarter budget revisions, which will be in April, regardless of whether we know how much money we have at that point. And I'll also ask if there's any members of the public online who would wish to give audience participation. And looking at staff. Okay, I don't see anybody. So we will use the last 10 minutes, end at 1:20 for sure. And then I'll go to our last item. So thanks, folks, for your reports. I see we have Paula Reiswig from the Treasury Department, who I believe might be here to give the treasurer's report, or is it Alden? Okay, so let's move on to our last item, which is the revenue report.
And I'll have to apologize. Glenn is on vacation and I wasn't aware of it, so I failed to follow up with that. What I will say is the last one that he gave me showed that our revenues were very strong last year. Mainly in all those areas of hotel and rental car and all those kind of things. So much that when you remember, we made the decision back in December to allocate that 1.8 million for the Performing Arts Center elevators. That's because we felt very confident that our budget / revenues for the year were 1.97 for the general fund things, kick out the marijuana tax and alcohol tax stuff, but the operating fund things that we had a positive 1.97 million at the end of the year. So we used 1.8 of that to be able to fund that particular thing. So I think his comments, and I talked to Paula beforehand, that there was really no significant change in where they were for December. On the revenues came in pretty close to what they were, which were very strong. But I had him looking at stuff in December for that particular one. So I would think that if he was here right now, the report, the numerical stuff on at least that will be there. And I'll make sure that in February, when we have this meeting, that he gives a December one. And I think that's normal because we pretty much don't get any revenue stuff from them for the first 6 months of the year anyway. So I'll have him focus on redoing that. But that's kind of the update on revenues. We met budget and probably exceeded it in most on a gross basis across the things.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And yeah, I think we'll look for that next month. And then I'll just remind as well, please send PDF versions of any reports that you give in advance if possible, or maybe concurrent with the meeting, because when we have folks on the phone, they need a copy of it. And then we also need to post it publicly. So just a reminder.
And Sharon will give
Yeah.
the clerk this information so she can post it on the website today.
Yeah. So Mr. Vera, sorry, we didn't have that for you in advance. I also had one question on the revenue report. So I remember the discussion about vehicle rental tax. It generally tracks with bed tax because it has to do with people visiting our community and renting vehicles. And I know that there's been kind of the consistent revenue report, which is that it's going to meet or exceed what the projection was. However, there was a policy choice in the FY24 budget that we didn't change as the assembly that assumed 1 million less in revenue. And I understand the principle of being small c conservative in terms of not being overly optimistic in what revenue we're pulling in. But I guess I'll flag that as something that we need to come back to in our first quarter budget revisions for 24. And then also just see if there's any, if you have any kind of anticipated reduction of revenue that we'll get in 24 for vehicle rental tax.
And thank you, Chair Barley. I think I'm going to look at Paula while I talk to this. We are at the stage where they need to be projecting what all of those categories are for 2024, not just the rental car one. So I would think in February, we'd probably come back with ensuring that the Treasury Department's budget for the year on all those same categories that they historically have done are there. And as we know, last year in several of those categories, they were conservative, and then we blew everything out of the water based upon what happened with the tourism increase. So I actually have not spoken to him on is he going to be conservative again this year, or how challenging it is. But I assume the Treasury staff is in the mid-process of figuring out what their expectations are based upon trends and so forth for this year. So we'll circle back around on that. And Paula, I'm sure will take some notes as well. Yeah. Paula, if you're going to speak, you got to come up here.
Yeah, if you want to say anything, you need to be on the record. Thank you. And also don't forget to mention who you are as well for the record.
I'm Paula Reiswig with Treasury. And I just wanted to point out that for 2023 so far, thinking of rental vehicle tax already, and remember, this is a quarterly tax paid. So we do the following month of the quarter. So we have not received all our rental income tax for fourth quarter yet. But as of 2 days ago, when I actually pulled the revenue numbers for 2023, we are budgeted for 2023 at 10 million, and we already have 9.8 million. So that I think we're going to do even better this next year, but I agree with Glenn in wanting to go conservative.
Thank you. And then I'll just flag again, 9.8 without the final number is larger than 9 million, which is what is currently in our 2024 budget. So we will come back to that. So I think I didn't hear any other questions from members, and I think we are through the end of our agenda. So I know we extended a little bit longer, but I don't think we need that. So I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody.